My Unreal Engine characters currently have 4 main systems that facilitate every action the actor is allowed to take. These components communicate between each other, the character class, and even with items in the character's possession to smoothly translate functionality into gameplay. In no particular order, these systems are named equipment, combat, health, and interaction. Let's take a look at how they work. Everybody loves gear, and gear is best when it's not a chore to access and use. As much as I hate to over-reference the same influence, I think Kojima does a really good job with this, especially considering his titles are commonly built for controllers first. A departure I'm currently choosing to take from something like Death Stranding, however, is the avoidance of weapon wheels or any other item expansion method for overcoming controller input limitations. So, at least for the time being, everything needs to be accessible directly with a button. Currently, I let the player carry 2 primary weapons, 1 secondary, 1 melee, and 2 thrown weapon types, like grenades or knives. The idea is to have both lethal and non-lethal options in each category to give people a good variety of items and therefore loadouts. My current ideas for the input mappings use the left D-pad to toggle between primaries and the right for your sidearm. For grenades, I had planned on using both the up and down D-pad buttons, one for each grenade type, similar to how Doom Eternal allows you to launch grenades at the same time as shooting another weapon, but it actually saves me input real estate to only use one to toggle between both types, and then a more traditional Metal Gear Solid approach of aiming first before releasing the grenade. While I like the design of having more options in the heat of combat, not only does this save me input real estate, but getting the trajectory information while you're aiming a grenade is probably going to be more useful for a stealth title. And that just leaves melee weapons. And while I do have buttons left open for it, the rest of the project kind of needs more work before I'm ready to talk about this. So for now, its placeholder is the X equivalent face button. If the player is configured to carry weapons when the game starts, each one is first sent to be attached to any open equipment sockets. Each weapon with a proper magazine is filled with ammo except for 1 round, which is used to chamber the weapon. Once all equipment slots are occupied, the overflow is dropped on the ground in front of the player. The last part is really more for debugging than anything else, so I don't run into crashes if I misconfigure this array, but it could also be used for console commands or novelty modes in the future. From here, most of the remaining weapon functionality is handled by the combat system. Anything related to attacking, either with equipment or abilities, is delivered with this system. There is a lot of circular communication, though, between these 2 systems in particular that I think is interesting to mention. Equipment listens for the aim function from the combat system and kicks off the weapon's retrieve animation. Near the end of that sequence, once the weapon is properly oriented, a green light is given back to combat that enables automatic fire. From there, equipment listens for the player to release the aim input, triggering the stow animation, which also notifies combat, halting any attack actions currently in progress. For every round the player fires, a projectile is spawned and accelerated based on real-world performance. Even though it looks more like an AR platform, this weapon's projectile is currently modeled after the 7.62 by 39mm cartridge. But just so we're clear, I'm not trying to make a military sim. Ultimately, I'd like to mix energy and ballistic firearm types with engagement trade-offs for each, but taking this approach early on will hopefully open up a lot of creative ways to utilize these differences for deeper player choice. Another feature of projectiles is their optional ability to spawn explosions on impact. This code was actually originally written for a rocket launcher in a Quake-like project I tinkered with way back when I first got started with Unreal. But I see no reason why I can't have one in this title either. Like everything else, it just needs to be balanced with the other offerings, maybe with scarcity or compromised stealth, maybe a high chance of self-damage. You get the idea. Character abilities are also managed with this system, but I'm not quite ready to talk about what that looks like either, so for now, let's just take a look at how damage from these items is applied using the health system. At the moment, all characters start out with 100 health, and health is reduced by harmful influences that impact any of the actor's hitboxes. These are also color-coded by severity, red being the most lethal place to receive damage. The player is currently subject to these same rules as well, so all characters can die from just a couple of properly placed rounds. This is definitely just a starting place, but my interest is mixing the intensity of, say, Splinter Cell's quick time to kill, while still allowing for Deus Ex flexibility for each encounter. Combat shouldn't necessarily be avoided at all costs, but ideally extremely brutal for unprepared players. I'll know I'm on the right track if speedrunners are the only group that can consistently beat the game without using any stealth at all. This all might seem a little heavy-handed, but if you've played Ready or Not, for instance, you'll know the satisfaction of surgically dispatching enemies that feel just as dangerous as yourself. Apart from that, I'll likely also implement some kind of fall damage, but for now I think I can just get away with ignoring that. The real next steps for this system would be exploring sleeps, stuns, and any other way to affect characters outside of just health point loss. So that leaves the fourth, but not necessarily final pillar of the character's functionality, the interaction system. Each item in the game, be it a weapon or a simple physics-enabled prop, can be interacted with. Currently, the system simply checks to see if you're within an item's interaction area. It's like a big pill shape. As long as the player overlaps this and conditions allow for that item's action to be realized, like having enough open equipment slots, the Y button will trigger the behavior. There's also the issue of user experience between the two perspectives. With the proximity-based approach, it feels pretty accessible in third person, especially for how pedestrian the implementation really is at the moment. When the player overlaps many different items at once, the nearest object is selected for interaction. But in first person, I'm thinking it's going to make a lot more sense to point your perspective at the item that you'd like to grab, which may or may not be the nearest item. Ultimately, this system is going to need a lot more exploration, but my hope is that I won't need a separate approach for each perspective. For now, I feel okay tackling these problems in the future. As I mentioned in the beginning of the last section, these four systems may not be enough to get me all the way to release. But for now, all of my relevant character features seem to fit nicely within these groups. In the future, I'll be exploring a lot of detailed expansions to these systems like reload, magazine management, unannounced combat abilities, and perhaps different player statuses like poison or fatigue. I'm also shooting for a playable demo before the end of this year, so definitely get subscribed if you want to know when that gets released.